Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're tearing into the dark fantasy lore of Dark Souls to uncover the hidden, honestly pretty messed up tragedy of Lord Gwyn. We are going to explore the totally forgotten origins of humanity, a world-altering cosmic sin, and the absolute musical genius that ties this whole epic together. Trust me, if you think you know the story of the Age of Fire, you are about to look at it through a completely different lens. Let's get into it.
So think about this for a second. What if the supposed hero of our story was actually its absolute greatest villain? It's a wildly provocative question, right? Great Lord Gwyn is almost always celebrated as this selfless god of light who sacrificed everything to keep the dark at bay. But when you actually start unpacking the lore buried in item descriptions, cryptic dialogue, and, amazingly, even the game's musical score, a much, much darker narrative starts to bleed through. The whole thing really starts with the ultimate wild card, the furtive pygmy. While the other great lords were busy claiming souls of light, life, and death from the first flame, this totally forgotten ancestor found a fourth, completely unique power, the Dark Soul. But instead of hoarding it like a typical god would, the pygmy did something crazy. He shattered his soul among his descendants to forge the very first humans. Which means humanity itself, at its core, is quite literally made of fragmented pieces of the Dark Soul. To really wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this tragedy, we've got to look at the whole cosmic timeline. We're starting way back at the dawn of disparity, moving through the massive, world-shaking war against the everlasting dragons, down to the highly secretive sealing of the Ring City, and culminating in Gwyn's completely world-breaking decision to link the First Flame. But to truly understand why he took that final, desperate step, we have to look at the underlying forces he was fighting against. You see, the source material makes it pretty clear that light and dark aren't strictly good and evil. They actually operate a lot more like yin and yang. Light, which is Gwyn, fire, the gods, is fast, hot, and intensely active. Dark, on the other hand, humanity, the abyss, is slow, diffuse, and passive. They're just counterbalances. You literally need both to keep nature in harmony. You can't have one without the other. But Lord Gwyn, sitting way up on his throne of light, he just couldn't accept that. And you can kind of see why he was stressed, because here is the crazy part about the Dark Soul. It holds sheer, unending potential. Unlike Gwyn's power, which actually weakens every time he divides it, the Dark Soul draws from the infinite abyss. It doesn't lose a drop of power when it's shared. Early humans used this limitless, sprawling energy to forge incredible weapons, eventually becoming the fiercely formidable ringed knights. And frankly, humanity's help was absolutely essential to defeating the dragons. But rather than being grateful to his new allies, Gwyn was absolutely terrified of them. The primordial serpent Kaeth paints a genuinely chilling picture of this dynamic. He flat out states that Lord Gwyn was a profoundly fearful god, a guy who was desperate to maintain his own dominance at literally any cost. Instead of just allowing the Age of Fire to naturally run its course and fade into the Age of Men, Gwyn actively, forcefully resisted the course of nature, simply because he trembled at what humanity might eventually become. Now, a quick reality check here. We do have to read between the lines a bit, because taking historical advice from giant, creepy, toothy serpents with obvious hidden agendas is, well, it's a choice. Both Kaathe and Frampt are incredibly manipulative narrators who love twisting the truth for their own gain. So to find the real story, we have to look past their self-serving monologues and examine Gwyn's actual historical track record. And his track record is grim. Gwyn didn't just fight humanity on a battlefield. He executed a masterful, incredibly deceitful diplomatic trap to permanently isolate their terrifying power. First, he gifts, and I'm using massive air quotes there, he gifts the pygmies this magnificent ringed city at the literal edge of the world. Then he offers his own daughter Filianor as the supposed token of peace. But here is the ultimate heartbreaking betrayal. He completely abandons her to an eternal slumber, using his own kid as a magical anchor to seal the ringed city and the Dark Soul away forever. But apparently, geographic imprisonment just wasn't enough for the Lord of Sunlight. He actually cast a cruel cosmic curse on humanity known as the Dark Sign. I want you to imagine a literal ring of fire branded directly around the darkness of human souls, specifically designed to burn away the abyss that naturally seeps out of them. He effectively castrated humanity's natural power. This fiery brand is the sole direct cause of human mortality and that horrifying undead curse that eventually forces humans to hollow out. Aldia, the scholar of the first sin, hits the nail on the head here with this beautifully melancholic thought.
He points out that our vulnerable mortal state, what he calls our fleeting form, was actually never our natural condition. It was a totally artificial state forced upon us by the Lord of Light just to keep us weak, divided, and manageable. We were completely robbed of our true nature.
And here's the thing. When you completely destroy the natural balance of the cosmos out of pure paranoia, the blowback is always going to be catastrophic. By suppressing the dark so violently, Gwyn essentially created horrifying extremes on both sides of the spectrum. Over on the fire side, we get a desperately fading flame that demands unnatural fueling, birthing chaos demons and hollowed-out gods. And on the dark side, that intense, pressurized suppression causes the abyss to violently erupt into feral mutations, exactly like the nightmare we see in the doomed land of Ulasil. Gwyn literally broke the world.
Which brings us to the absolute climax of our tragedy, the first sin. When the first flame inevitably began to sputter and die, Gwyn flat out refused to let the Age of Dark begin. So, in the ultimate panic move, he threw his own body into the fire, sacrificing his incredibly powerful Lord Soul to artificially fuel the flame. Sure, he bought his era a little more time, but he committed a colossal sin against nature itself. He locked the entire world into a stagnant, agonizing cycle of decaying undeath. Fast forward thousands of years to the literal end of the world. When you finally face down the last boss of Dark Souls 3, the Soul of Cinder, you aren't just fighting some random knight guarding a bonfire. You are fighting a physical, towering amalgamation of every single lord who ever threw themselves into that fire. And the very foundation of this massive entity, the absolute core of its being, is the tragic, lingering remnant of Gwyn's original sacrifice. And here is where the presentation absolutely blows my mind. The story of that sacrifice isn't just in the item descriptions, it's baked directly into the music. The fan community brilliantly decoded how the boss's theme acts as a literal historical timeline. The first minute and a half features this intense, triumphant orchestra representing the epic war against the dragons. Then it suddenly drops into a sad, melancholic tone as the Age of Fire fades. Finally, it shifts into this mellow, struggling sound, which is Gwyn stubbornly linking the flame in deep, deep denial of the end. But then, you hit the second phase of the boss fight, and everything changes. That massive, swelling orchestra is completely stripped away. Suddenly, out of nowhere, all you hear is a delicate, iconic, three-note piano melody. This dramatic musical shift perfectly captures the total devastation of the first sin. That solitary, echoing piano represents the absolute blankness of Gwyn's mind. He isn't the great, majestic Lord of Sunlight anymore. He has completely lost his sanity, his monumental power, and his dignity to the fire. All that remains in that arena is a feral, hollowed husk driven by a singular, mindless instinct just to protect the fading embers. It so brilliantly illustrates the ultimate and escapable truth of this universe. Entropy always wins. By the end of time, the physical landscape is ruined, contorted into an endless sea of ash, and the first flame simply lacks the fortitude to be linked anymore. In those quiet, defeated piano notes, we hear Gwyn finally accepting that it's over. His last, desperate fight isn't to save the world, it's just a deeply tragic desire to be remembered before the dark finally, inevitably takes over. So, wrapping all this up, after uncovering the forgotten history of the Pygmy, the brutal, fiery containment of humanity, the catastrophic fallout of the first sin, and that tragic, gorgeous music that binds it all together, I want to leave you with one final question. Did Great Lord Gwyn sacrifice everything to selflessly save his world from the dark? Or was he a tyrant so deeply terrified of losing his power that he destroyed the natural order of the cosmos just to ensure his legacy? It completely changes how you view the Lord of Light, doesn't it? Thanks for exploring this with me, and as always, keep questioning what you think you know.